Good evening. Welcome to the Elections Daily's special UK local elections result preview show. I'm joined by Elections Daily's three British contributors, Adam, Sarah, and Nick. And we have a very packed show, and because of this being packed, we'll get straight forward to the big thing of the local elections. And that is, and just as I say this, we have another person who joins us, and I will give him good measure. Max, our Northern Ireland friend, also on Elections Daily as well. Hello, Max.
Hi there. Good to see you.
Good to see you. So we will jump first right into Hartlepool, the main showcase of the night, arguably the narrative breaker of the night, where Labour has a northern seat that is open because of the previous MP resigning, likely due to harassment issues that are being dealt with at the Met. And this seat, which has been Labour since 1964, is in danger of falling to the Conservatives in what could be described Labour's red wall problem. This is actually a red wall seat, not what the journalists overuse with the red wall. But we'll start first. I'll go first to Sarah. You do live in the north. You live in a seat that was one of those red wall seats that the current Prime Minister Johnson won. What is your take and thoughts on the Hartlepool by-election?
Well, interestingly, I ran into my MP a couple of weeks ago, because I know, and then I saw her today when I was polling. And she was being interviewed when I saw her last, and she is being interviewed for a book called The Red Wall by a Times journalist. So this is obviously extremely appropriate. I'm not as northern as Hartlepool. Hartlepool is sort of quite a bit more north. I'm the Midlands technically, though I refute the term absolutely. But it was a seat that could have definitely gone in part of 2019, but Brexit Party decided to have a go at it, and the vote that they got, I believe they came third or second. We could have easily won if that vote had combined. And there is the Reform Party, whatever it is this time around, but I somewhat doubt they will have any traction. So that is why it's so positive. It voted 70% Leave. It's very working class Port Town, which is oddly where Tories seem to thrive. Even maybe 20 years ago, Labour was seen as a part of the working class, and now it's the complete opposite. It's the Tories are doing very well with those who aren't university educated or live in poor areas, whereas the Labour are going for the nice, leafy London seats.
I'll jump this over to Nick. You are obviously toss-up butt, and you, I believe, I don't know exactly where you live, but what are your thoughts on the Hartlepool by-election?
I mean, well, I'm on the opposite end of the country. I'm in Southampton, so I'm not too clued up about this, but I have done some research on it. And, well, I mean, I think Sarah covered all the main things about it. In 2019, I think, it was won by Labour by a margin of about 9%, but it came a lot closer than it usually does, which was a sign that this was a seat that fell. Well, I don't really want to say fell victim because it didn't flip, but you did see some of the same effects here, and that was very. I think a big part of that was Brexit, really, because that was a big theme of the election, and it, like a lot of other areas in the north, voted quite heavily to leave the EU. And this year, I'm just sort of going off like conventional wisdom rather than what I've read, but this seat does seem like Conservatives to lose, because they have been polling quite well, like sort of mixed results. I think they've fallen a bit in recent polls nationwide. So if this does turn out to be a good night for them nationwide, then this I think this will have a high chance of flipping, because they'll probably consolidate a lot of that Brexit Party vote that from 2019. But like. I don't think it's a sure thing at the moment. Someone might correct me on this, someone who knows more about the race, but I think this is definitely one to watch.
Adam?
So I think like the specific thing to look at with Hartlepool is the consequences of this by-election, because a lot of the narrative that's been set around it is focusing not only on, this being sort of not really a referendum on Boris Johnson, but being like a real test of if the recent sort of corruption allegations against him are really taking hold by the general public. So that would be the major thing, is that if the Conservatives are able to pull off a major victory, a victory sort of like the one that a Salvation constituency poll predicted, in which there was a 17% Conservative victory. Obviously, it's a constituency poll, so it has all the caveats that come with that. But if it's something that major, then it would completely sort of change the narrative of if people actually care about said corruption stories. And then the other aspect of it is that it is focusing on the fact, this is a part of the Red Wall. And Keir Starmer's sort of whole thing has been trying to not only retain the sort of more, home counties, sort of suburban voter, but also to retain or try and, bring back the Red Wall voter. So it's a combination of seeing if he is able to actually keep those seats down south, which will be one of the major tests sort of looking towards council elections, but also the other element of if he is actually able to keep Red Wall voters. And if he isn't able to, then there'll be a lot of internal questions for the Labour Party about if Keir Starmer's message, if his idea of actually winning back said demographic is something that he's, being able to work on.
Max?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the important things have been said, but I think it's important to add that the Conservative win has kind of been on the cards for a while. Even looking back to 2010, 2015, they've been close to winning it, but maybe parties like Brexit Party, UKIP, the BNP have kind of taken 20% of the vote away from them, which means that Labour can just hang on to it. It's probably not the ideal seat for Keir Starmer to be evaluated on because it is, with those previous results, it looks like more of a Labour seat than maybe it actually is. But I mean, if Labour go on to lose it, I still think in the media they're going to get torn pretty badly because of those optics. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
And funny you mentioned that. I think that leads to my next question on Hartlepool. We've seen Labour increasingly across the board have a problem with white working class voters in the north, but really in general across Britain. And the narrative is seemingly pushing. It seems that now Hartlepool may push that. I ask all of you, if Labour does lose this by-election, what can or what should Labour do to try and fix its white working class problem that arguably is spreading more issues and seats across the north that could be in danger, in a future election? I'll let Adam. Looks like he wants to talk first. I'll let you go.
That is an impossible question to ask because we're not in the position to fully understand where
Yes.
the issues that ultimately underlie. But I think some of the major things that could be offered is primarily to try and present some kind of alternative image. That the major thing. The major thing for the moment with the Labour Party is that they're in a very unfortunate position for a number of reasons. So first of all, you currently have a government who is being very successful with their vaccine rollout, sort of the sort of vaccine boost, as it's called. You've also got the fact that this election is taking place at a time when people are seeing the results of a Conservative government that is giving them vaccines. And then you also have the other element of it, which is Keir Starmer can't exactly be much of an opposition, because you see that whenever there is some divisive issue in which Labour diverts from the Conservative Party on, people start saying that, it's Labour being divisive, they aren't going along with the government at a time of national crisis, that kind of thing. So those three elements make it really, really difficult to actually change anything, or at least try and present some kind of different image that is, actually has substance to it. But I think the major thing that Labour could try to do is really just try and hunker down and wait for this period of good faith with the government to sort of continue and slowly, spill over, and eventually it will end at some point. And which after that they do need to have some real actual alternative. They need to have something that people can identify and think that is a Labour policy, or that is something that Keir Starmer offers. So I think that would be the major thing. But they shouldn't. I don't feel like they should present that kind of thing now, because it would be seen as being too divisive. Them trying to be opportunistic
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Feel free to
Yeah, I
jump
mean,
in.
the impression I'm getting is that they're playing it safe.
Mhm.
I think I'm probably like paraphrasing what Adam said, but
No problem.
yeah, like Starmer definitely isn't as much in the spotlight as Corbyn was, for
Mhm.
example. So like yeah, like Corbyn, like when Labour had Corbyn, they had a surprisingly good election result in 2017, and then a shockingly bad one in 2019. So that was a risk. That was a risky move that they took by electing him as their leader. Now they have a more sort of generic left wing. I don't know how to describe him, but yeah, he is
Social Democrat.
for lack of a better word, boring. And that's not necessarily a bad thing to some voters. They prefer that to someone like Corbyn, and that's why they might be able to minimise their losses in this election. But as some people here have mentioned, it is a very, very unique time in that we've had this pandemic going on for a year and a half, and it's all been happening under the Conservative government, and they have had successes and failures, and it's really worth watching which one the voters will look more at, because the polls have shown mixed results.
Indeed, very much different polling. You have certain polling that shows that the Tories are barely winning, and others, like YouGov's, showing that they have double-digit leads. So it's a very interesting question of who's actually right and where the country's at. Sarah?
Well, I think a lot of it is down to cultural issues. When you look at how, and I think it's definitely sort of an American input with the culture wars. During the Black Lives Matter protest over the summer and various other incidents, they pulled down statues, defaced Churchill and other war monuments. Now, the Tories said, okay, we're going to stamp down on this, which appeals to the patriotic nature of your average white, maybe working class northern man or woman.
Mm-hmm.
And when you've got MPs talking about Palestine and Venezuela, which are important issues, no one can deny that, especially for those suffering in horrible regimes. But does that affect your average voter? No, most people aren't going to vote on Palestine and Israel and Venezuela and everywhere else. They're going to vote on, okay, in the general election, will I keep my job? Will I get a pay rise? In the locals, who's going to fill my potholes?
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of it is down to and I think it's similar to what the Democrats are doing in America. If you look at maybe more 2016 than 2020 with the Rust Belt going towards Trump, because Hillary, she talked about the gender card, as she called it, and a lot of things like LGBT, race talk, which is important in society. But at the end of the day, these Rust Belt people have lost a lot of things, and they don't really care about that. They're going to vote for someone who's more focused on keeping jobs in America. And it's exactly the same in the UK. What Labour needs to do is get back to that patriotic cause. But a lot of them conflate patriotism and racism, when a patriotic person should never be racist.
Mm-hmm. So in your view, it's more of going back to what certain people in Labour would say, the old school working class values that Labour used to run around with.
To be fair, like I think there is some issue with that interpretation, though, because Keir Starmer's whole thing during this local election, and the point thing is that, this is a local election. So despite the fact a lot of people talk about national issues, they don't really apply here. But Keir Starmer's major thing has been about, making sure that there are enough police officers on the streets, talking about crime, and saying that, ultimately, some of the more fascinating social media ads were saying that Labour was tougher on crime than the Conservatives. Yeah, exactly. So I feel like, they are attempting that idea of ignoring, because ultimately, like, Labour, the kind of social issues that are being referenced, like, I feel like, Keir Starmer isn't talking about that. Like, when Black Lives Matter was a major thing in, the UK discourse, of course he was going to contribute towards that, because ultimately it was a big thing that people were talking about. But Keir Starmer isn't talking about Venezuela or Israel. And to be honest, I feel that people are listening to the MPs who actually are. The real issue is that his message of, being tough on crime, or, when he's standing by flags or ultimately using the Union flag as a backdrop, people see that, but they aren't taking it as seriously enough. And I think that's the major issue. Is people just not, taking it and going, yes, this is what, Labour represents. I feel like part of it is left over from the Corbyn era, of people thinking, oh, Labour were ruined then, they can't be that different now. But also, I just feel like it is people's goodwill with the government because of the success during the pandemic. People are more willing to listen to them than the alternative.
So in your mind, it's more that Labor's doing a lot of these optic things. It's just that they have the disadvantage of having to go against a government that is doing a very popular vaccine rollout in a health pandemic, more or less.
Yeah, partly that. Yeah.
Max.
I just mentioned that I think Starmer is really stuck in fighting against a massive personality in the shape of Boris Johnson, who kind of dominates the airwaves, he dominates the media all the time. He's getting press attention. He's popping up even in social media on memes and places unrelated to politics. Whereas Starmer, he's that steady hand, but he's understated, and he's not out there really like fighting big battles all the time. And as maybe Labour voters don't particularly want that mass personality, but he's struggling from a lack of press attention and getting his name out there, trying to get his agenda. So you see like bits and pieces of what he wants to do. You see him pushing a bit of the patriotism. I remember when the government announced about reducing the size of the army, he was kind of out there pushing, oh no, we need to keep our numbers up, but he's never the top of the agenda. He's always fighting against someone bigger.
Yeah, I think that's that. And on the last point about Hartlepool, I don't like to do this, but because it's always good for good measure, who do you all think will win tonight if you had to make a final prediction? It doesn't have to be specific. You can just make your prediction if you want. I'll go with the order I have it on my screen first. Nick.
I'm going to be a wild card and say Labour.
Sarah.
Purely on anecdotal evidence I've heard today, Conservatives.
Adam.
The Northern Independence Party, obviously. No. It'll be much closer, but it'll be the Conservatives by like 1% or 2%, I think.
Max?
It'll be the Conservatives by 6 or 7, I reckon.
Very fun. And we now move on to the other things that are being elected on tonight, and that is the Senate and the Scottish Parliament, both of which are the devolved assemblies of the UK, two of which are having their elections this year. In Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP are looking to return as a majority government after losing their majority in 2016. Meanwhile, in Wales, Mark Greatford, apologies if I do that wrong, is seeking another term as the Welsh First Minister, currently in a coalition, not technical the term, but I'm just going to call it a coalition with the Liberal Democrats, looking to either trying to get his own majority back. Haha, Eric, very funny. In that, so we'll first start off in Scotland. Where the SNP polling has started to make a different picture. Certain polls have said the SNP is on track for a majority, but there was one poll this week that said that they would actually lose seats and that the Unionist parties and the Greens, for the most part, would hold them off from getting a majority. So we'll start off with Scotland first. I'll go to Adam first with his view of the Scottish election.
So there are two major things to look out for with this election. So I think the first one is obviously, does the SNP get a majority? Because if they get a majority by themselves, it's a very good sign for the independence movement. If they have to rely upon the Scottish Green Party, because there will almost definitely be a majority for pro-independence parties, then they'll have to look at the other angle of it, of do they get enough votes? So by that I mean, obviously they'll get a majority of seats, but in terms of a majority of the votes, do pro-independence parties get a majority, or do unionist parties get a majority? But because their votes are split in certain areas, it means that the SNP and Scottish Green Party are able to come out on top. So that has some very interesting implications, because sure, maybe the actual Scottish Parliament looks like it has a pro-independence majority, but in terms of voters, it's not the same case. And then the second thing I'd say to look towards is who comes second. Is it the Scottish Labour Party or is it the Scottish Conservative Party? Because whoever is the leader of the opposition will completely set the narrative of any future independence referendum. If it's the Scottish Conservative Party, it will be very, very different to if it's the Scottish Labour Party. And I think that's something to really keep an eye on and could be very, very crucial.
And it should be noted that most polls have the Tories and Labour very neck and neck in terms of seats. average vote seats wise, I'd say about 26 to 28 for the Tories. It's 30 if they're on the higher end, and Labour about 18 to about 26, depending on the polling as well. Sarah.
I have to admit that I've not been following Scotland probably as closely as others, but I think a lot of it will be a referendum on Nicola Sturgeon herself. I know there's been some controversy around her recently. Again, probably not something I'm totally clued in on, but she is an extremely divisive figure in not only Scottish politics but in national politics. This is a referendum on her leadership. On COVID, has she done well during COVID? You know, Scotland's had higher cases, things like that, and their responses seem different to England, Northern Ireland, and Wales. And I believe the SNP will retain a majority. I think it's more likely because I still think they are very much the dominant party. I don't believe there's a huge appetite for independence, but again, we don't know exactly what the Scottish people are thinking. That's about it from me.
Yeah, and I'll go to Max before I say that. It should be noted that Nicola Sturgeon still does carry very high approval ratings across the boards. I believe the most popular politician in Great Britain, even with the scandal of her lying in the cabinet office. But as Sarah mentioned, that's going to be very much a test of how far can she get. Is it a majority or minority government? Max.
Yeah. This election really, it's really all about independence. You see the Conservatives, Labour trying not to make it about independence because they know if it is, the SNP have got a pretty good shot at a majority. I'd say at this stage, the SNP are right on the knife edge, but I think they'll probably tip over, get that majority in the end. Because, I mean, if you look at Labour, the main left-wing opposition, they've got actually a pretty popular leader in Anas Sarwar, but he's only had 3 or 4 months in charge of the party, and as a result hasn't really had time to implement himself into the national spotlight. So they haven't, as much as his approval ratings are quite high right now, the party's polling numbers haven't gone up. You look at the Conservatives, they're really just weighed down by the unpopularity of Boris Johnson, who is, minus 50 approval ratings in Scotland. Is just shockingly bad. And Douglas Ross, the Scottish Conservative leader, is not particularly popular either. And then you've got the Greens as well, who will be. I mean, their polling looks like they're going to double their seats, possibly maybe up to 10 or 11. So it should be a pretty. Obviously, they're pro-independence as well. So if a good night for the SNP and the good night for the Greens could hold a pretty strong majority for independence, and the pressure will be on Boris Johnson then as to whether he will allow a referendum to happen.
And that will be very much a big pressure on him, as the Prime Minister said numerous times he would not grant a second referendum. However, if there is an SNP majority, that very much complicates matters in that situation. Nick?
Yeah, I wanted to mention, and I don't think anyone's mentioned it so far, is the Alba Party. Alex Salmond's party, who has been created by saying, we want to create a supermajority for Scottish independence. But the question that I have, and I think a lot of other people have, is who's going to vote for them? In the polls, they haven't been registering like 3% or something low like that. And I'm curious to get anyone else's thoughts, if anyone else has any. But I just don't think their messaging has been good. I don't think they've been distinguishing themselves from the SNP as much. So I really don't think who's going to vote for them.
It should also be noted they are not running in the constituency. They're trying to get on the list. The Scottish election has a constituency and listing. For those who are not familiar with this, it's a very intriguing system. But yes, Alba is trying to run as basically a junior SNP party, but so far with no good results. I'll leave the question to the floor since Nick did put it to any minutes.
Yeah, I don't mind just saying, but there's the actual question of, do they hurt the pro-independence parties in the list vote? Because ultimately, if they're split, I saw some great analysis which said if Alba was able to get around the 5 to 6% mark, then they'd ultimately be helping the Scottish Green Party and the SNP, because the type of list seats they'd be taking would be ones from unionist parties. But if they're only registering around 2-3%, then they could be actively hurting the Scottish Green Party and the SNP, depending on which region it's in. On the list vote by splitting it to such an extent. So that's definitely something to keep an eye out on if they split it too much so it denies parties actual list seats.
Yes, that's very much true indeed. And it should also be noted that depending on which poll is right, the SNP may either hemorrhage seats off its constituency thing if that poll, I believe it was from Salvation, if I recall correctly, had them down very badly with the constituency vote, but that other polling has had them relatively stable, their last result. But it's interesting, as you all mentioned, of course, that Boris Johnson is not very much a popular man in Scotland, worst approval ratings of all the 4 major countries. So I put the question to you, if the SNP does win a majority, or there is a pro-independence majority, and they do call for ask for a referendum in this next Scottish timeframe, how much pressure is Boris Johnson under, especially to, even if he rejects it, how much pressure would he be in Scotland internally itself if he decided to say, I will not grant the Scottish people a vote, even if they would say it would be a majority of nationalists in the Hollywood Assembly? Anyone can take this.
I would say Boris Johnson is going to be under massive pressure because Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP are very clever, very astute tacticians politically. They know exactly what they're doing, and they will apply the pressure relentlessly if they get a majority. I mean, over the next year, I imagine the Scottish Airways will just be filled non-stop with whether there will be a referendum or not, and I actually give that over the whole of the UK. And I mean, if it really becomes a national topic as opposed to just a Scottish topic, and people in England and actually Northern Ireland and Wales as well, where there's more separatist feeling as well. If the pressure really starts piling on from all parts of the UK, then it's going to become pretty difficult for Boris.
I think if he denies it, then so obviously after the election there will be some intense pressure if they do gain a majority. But a lot of the actual growth and support for independence will come as a result of denying the vote, because ultimately, even those no voters or sort of swing no voters will go, oh, obviously, Boris Johnson, who I dislike a lot, is denying my chance to say that I want to be as a part of the union. So ultimately, I think that Scotland should be independent because this isn't a fair relationship. This isn't equal. So I can only see independent support growing and growing and growing if that is denied.
Nick or Sarah? Yes, I think that's fair analysis. It should also be noted, of course, that the Scottish Tories in general have had a lot of problems, especially with the current leadership of shielding away from the past. Ruth Davidson has very much appeared on a lot of their election literature, to some who joke that she's still the actual leader of the party, not Douglas Ross, that he's just a caricature in place. But obviously, Scotland remains to be interesting to see. Of course, Douglas Ross will get elected on the list. He didn't run for his seat because he didn't register in time. Always fun when you don't file your paperwork on time. But he will do that, and then once it will probably have a decent result compared to what Labour had prior with its previous leadership in 2016. But on the point of Scotland, we now move to Wales. Now, this is, of course, the longest governed country by Labour currently of the 4 nations, having controlled the executive of Wales since the creation of the Welsh Assembly Parliament, whatever they call itself these days in Wales. No one knows what they call themselves.
You're going to get a lot of controversy for that.
Well, send me a donation, nationalist and unionist. I'll gladly take it. But yes, we move to the point. Mark Drakeford, of course, has been the first minister since 2016 and has very much been criticized and praised for his response for COVID. And currently, most polling has had Labour probably losing some seats, but probably in a position with the largest party in the Senate, with the Tories looking like they'll gain some seats in the Plaid Cymru, mostly holding what they have. And I'll start first with Sarah, thoughts on the Senate election?
Well, I think Wales, obviously, if we go back to the 2019 election, Conservatives did pretty well. I know in European elections, our exit party did well. But I still think Wales is not 100% a Tory seat. I still feel there is some resentment towards the Conservatives that dates back to the Thatcher years in a similar way, but not as strongly as Scotland. I think Labour will retain a majority. Plaid Cymru, I'm not sure about. I feel that there is less likely going to be Welsh independence. I feel there is less of an appetite for it. I could be completely wrong. That's obviously again up to the Welsh people. And I also feel that Plaid Cymru isn't necessarily as strong a force as the SNP, purely because they're not in charge. But it will be interesting to see. I have seen a lot of criticism of Mark Drakeford on my Twitter, but that is purely down to the fact I follow more Welsh Conservatives. So obviously, if I went some Welsh Liberals, I would probably have maybe a different reaction. But I don't know. I know that people have mocked him quite mercilessly, but you know, people have mocked Boris Johnson. People have mocked
Twitter.com mocks lots of people, endlessly, depending your political opinions. But that's fair enough.
So yeah, I'm probably not as clued into Wales. I mean, to be fair, I know far more about American politics than I do British politics.
Yeah, it's fine.
Which is a little bit sad if you're a Brit like me, but yeah. So again, I'm not sure, but well, we'll have to wait and see. But I think it will be less based on independence in Scotland.
Nick?
Yeah, I'm not really very clued up on Wales either. I mean, the only thing that I'm really keeping an eye on is, well, I mean, the basic, like basically just who keeps the majority, because I believe at the moment it's Labour and one Liberal Democrat member.
Yeah.
I have no idea. I have no idea if that Liberal Democrat member is going to hold on, or if she's even running again. I'm sort of just researching it now as I go.
Yeah, she's not running anymore.
No, she's not more. Okay. Okay. Cool. So, yeah, I think we'll probably come on to the Liberal Democrats later when we talk about local elections. But
yes.
But yeah, that's my only thought really. I don't really have any.
Adam, you look like you were unmute, so I'll let you go next.
Yeah, of course. So, broadly, the real question is obviously going to be: does Labour retain its majority? It's not technically a coalition, but that is one of the most pedantic things. And if you correct anyone on that, you're an awful human being. Anyway, so obviously there's the initial question of: does Labour get enough seats so that if the Liberal Democrats retain their one seat that they currently do, which is a constituency seat in Brecon and Radnorshire, if that's something that they can continue to hold, because ultimately they'd have to replicate results that they're not polling at. So obviously that will be very, very difficult if they say get 27 seats, Liberal Democrats only get one, they don't have a majority there. So obviously that's one major issue, which could also, foresee the possible future of a coalition, not between Labour and the Liberal Democrats, but between Labour and Plaid Cymru. So that itself presents a whole host of questions because, what are Plaid Cymru going to want out of said deal? Is it going to be, because they've gone in coalition before. It was a very sort of,
well.
Yeah, it did not at all. But I cannot imagine, and this is just my own personal opinion, any sort of approach towards Welsh independence at this stage. Ultimately, it's polling at about support of a third of the country. So if you were to go for, independence referendum as any deal for an actual coalition, that would be insane, just to the sense that you have such little support, and I feel like Plaid Cymru would be really shooting themselves in the foot if they went ahead with that. Anyway, that's one point of it. But I think the other really interesting element, besides who's going to hold a majority, is going to really be looking at the Liberal Democrats, and if they actually, first of all, if they retain their one seat, but also if they're able to, if they expand upon what they currently got in the regional lists and in some constituencies by like 2%, then they could see themselves on 5 seats. And if they're having a really good night, could be 7 seats. So obviously that is hugely different. So that itself is something to watch. But also the Abolish the Welsh Assembly Party, which is a fascinating little party in the sense that they want to get rid of the devolution that Wales currently has. They could see themselves winning a lot of the former UKIP sort of more right-wing populist vote, which is completely collapsed. And if they're able to get enough list seats, they're really going to be taking away not only from Labour, but also from the Conservatives. So yeah, they as themselves represent a fascinating thing to watch. Do they succeed? Do they not? Because a lot of projections at the moment have them winning. I think it's about 5 seats. But ultimately, if they get, say, 2% less than they need, they could be getting 0 seats. So yeah, there's a whole lot to look at with the Welsh election. And to be honest, I find it far more interesting than the Scottish one, because I feel like the Scottish one is just like, it's understood what's going to happen. Whereas with Wales, it's a bit more of a toss-up.
And it should be noted with the polling that, as mentioned, the Welsh Assembly, the Abolish the Welsh Assembly Party, always fun to get elected to the place you want to get rid of, is indeed polling well to get the seats. In the Liberal Democrats' case, if I recall correctly, they're currently on the knife edge on the list. It's kind of currently looks like they probably will lose that constituency seat because of the trend that Brecon and Radnor has had over the last few years. But yeah, it remains interesting to see. Of course, in Labour's case, if they lose seats, it now puts them in a situation where they'd have to negotiate with Plaid Cymru something, and it is something Mark Drakeford has ruled at times to try to say he wouldn't, compromise on the union. Of course, once it's a different story once it gets in. And as Adam mentioned, Plaid Cymru did do this back in 2007. They went into government with Labour. They proceeded at the next Welsh election to get kicked in the can for going into coalition. As the old joke is, the junior partner always gets the worst of the coalition. I'll let Max finish up his your thoughts on the Welsh Senate, since I can go to you next.
Well, I have to disagree in that I find the whole Scottish one a lot more interesting, to be honest. But the
Northern Ireland connection.
exactly. But I think this election is more. It's just it's going to be mostly just a realignment of those 7 UKIP seats, which they won last time. And I think everyone has forgotten really that UKIP were a prominent force 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're probably mostly just going to end up at the Conservatives, but I hope, even though I disagree with them on every.
Audio difficulties. Hopefully he can regain that. But no, it's interesting. We'll hope see if. Oh, it looks like he's back. Are you back, Max?
Oh, did I disconnect there?
Yeah, you cut off. You were talking about you disagreed with someone, and that's when you cut off.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I say although I wholeheartedly disagree with the Abolish the Welsh Assembly Party, I kind of want them to see them do something just to make it a little more interesting, because I don't see anything really changing. Maybe Labour will get a majority, maybe they won't, but it's pretty much status quo as far as I'm concerned.
We'll say, of course, as I mentioned, the Abolish Welsh Assembly Party taking seats in the said place they want to abolish would be quite entertaining thing. And it should be noted, of course, that, as Max mentioned, Wales did have a big UKIP presence, only the last Welsh election. And, of course, for the Tories, they did very well in these former areas. The UKIP did very well themselves, and also have done very well in North Wales, while doing a little worse in South Wales. Cardiff North comes to mind as a former Tory seat that is slowly gone away from the Conservative Party with that. But it does indeed look like Wales is a very interesting place, as mentioned by all the panelists here. It will come down to whether they hold their majority, lose seats, and have to make deals on that front. But, of course, we shall wait and see. Welsh polling has sort of said that Labour is probably going to lose seats. The question is how many seats. Some have said 27. Some have been a little more generous and said 29, 28, which, of course, without the Liberal Democrats, 1 or 2, depending on what they get, it may be Labour may have to give up some of its beliefs in order to retain power and continue its long streak of dominating Cardiff and the Senate. And for the Tories being in second place, while they're in third, is an improvement, but it's still a long way to go in Wales, as Sarah mentioned, as a place where historically the Conservatives have not done very well. Speaking of very well, we now move to the mayorships, always everyone's favorite topic, because of all the fun, hot takes you can have with local mayors. And we'll start off with the grand picture. There are many mayorships up. Some of the more prominent ones to look out for tonight, or tomorrow really, are the London, Tees Valley, West Midlands, West of England mayorship. And don't think I'm missing any other prominent ones, unless someone wants to tell me that I'm missing one. There's Manchester, of course, but that's kind of expected Labour will hold that. Unless you're lean toss-up who thinks that Andy Burnham will lose 20% on the first count, which of his
Don't
previous...
get me started on that. Do not get me started.
Thing. And also, yes, I forgot the other one about Trace. I also forgot the mayor of West Yorkshire, which might have a future by-election involved with that as well, because of that being given full mayorship powers. So we start with the mayorships. We'll try to cover as much as we can. We'll start with London. That is the election where Sadiq Khan, the current mayor, elected since 2016, is looking to be re-elected. Most polling says he will, albeit last-minute polling has shown him to start slowly decreasing off. But it still looks like he will win very comfortably a re-election. So I'll let the panel have your thoughts on the London mayorship, and we'll try to get as much thoughts as we can on all the mayorships for fairness. Anyone can go first. I don't particularly have a problem. But I'll go with Adam first, because you look like you want to say something.
It looked like Nick was gonna jump in, so I'll
Okay, go ahead.
Well,
Nick.
I just wanted to say something quickly. Like I just wanted to give just a quick thought, and that's that Sadiq Khan very likely to win. It seems the polling has consistently shown him in the lead. The real question is, will he win an outright majority, or will it go to?
Yes. Sorry. My bad.
No, I don't know how you call it. Would you call it a runoff? Because it's the same.
It's not really a runoff. It just uses the second.
Yeah. It's ranked choice voting, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I mean it's sort of ranked choice voting light.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's all my thoughts.
Adam?
So like this has been the most fascinating sort of a mayoral election campaign. At least, they usually are quite interesting, but I find this one the most interesting. And I think the primary thing is how awful the Conservative mayoral candidate has been. Sean Bailey he had a chance of trying to present, maybe he wasn't the right person, but take something like the West Midlands mayor, which we'll get onto, where somebody who was able to win in very unfavourable conditions because he seemed like he was a competent person who could run a local government, a regional government. Now, contrast this to Sean Bailey, who, beyond the fact that he doesn't understand that the position of London Conservatives isn't what it was in, say, 2010, where things were much, much more favourable. He seems to think that campaigning in or outside of London is something that is going to get people to vote for him. It's stuff like that, along with gaffes, for example. Creating like a leaflet which looks like a tax bill to try and show people that Sadiq Khan is going to increase, I believe it was council tax or something like that. But ultimately it caused a lot of concern for some people because they thought this was a real document. Anyway, so it's stuff like that. So he's a very gaffe-prone candidate. So that's compared to the other gaffe-prone candidate they had last time, Zach Goldsmith, and it's like, how could you get any worse?
He ran into trouble with his campaign of accusations of Islamophobia against Mr. Mayor Khan, who is Muslim himself. Exactly.
So you've got all of that, but that isn't what I care about, because seeing his campaign explode has been funny, but the real depth of where this is at is the satire candidates. Oh boy, London has a lot of them. And to be honest, there are a lot of satire candidates that don't mean to be satire candidates. So for example, let's take with the actual satire candidates. So the one that has been the most striking recently is Nico. Yeah, it is Nico. I can't remember if it's Nico or is Nico, definitely. Omalana, who is a YouTuber who does prank videos, traditionally along the lines of like creating a fake McDonald's or whatever. But his mayoral election campaign, at least in terms of polling, has done very, very well. In one poll, he was able to get 6%, which was, I believe, 1% above the Green Party. So, it's stuff like that where you go, that is quite funny. With policies like if any McDonald's has a broken ice cream machine, they get converted into low rent housing, and shipping off the EDL to Poland and stuff like that. So it's fun and stuff like that. So that, like, as a satire candidate, he has done very, very well. And then you've got other satire candidates like Count Binface. You've got Max Fosh, another YouTuber. Count Binface is also just a real legend of British satire, creating some fantastic song parodies to go along with his campaign. But then you've got the accidental satire candidates like Brian Rose, an American podcaster who has been alleged of basically taking people's money for business courses that are awful. He's had recent sort of things where it's been revealed of him. Was it nunchucks in his underwear?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And then the fact he was drinking his own pee, I believe, twice. So there's and he spent, I think, millions, or not millions, but probably hundreds of thousands of pounds on his campaign. So that's an accidental satire candidate. And then finally, you have Lawrence Fox, the of the Reclaim Party, the man who hates the metropolitan liberal elite of London so much that he wants to represent them. So yeah, London has been a fun time.
We should also not forget that both your party, the Liberal Democrats, have had 3 candidates to go with in London, 2 of which we will not mention what happened with them. Well, 1 actually, but to be fair, your 1 has done very well. It's the Greens leader of, co-leaders. I forget they actually do that. Simone Barry's also running. London, Sarah.
Well, I think a lot of it is down to Sadiq Khan and crime. I don't know the exact statistics for London, if it's any worse than any other city, but you're constantly hearing about, young black men being murdered on their own doorstep. Not even just black men, but, a lot of it is. And it's very heartbreaking. There's gang violence, just random horrible things, even stuff like not as bad as murder, like mugging, which is still a pretty horrible thing. And people have either tend to blame Sadiq Khan, saying, he's let this happen, or compare the Tories have cut police numbers. I still think Sadiq Khan will win. I think it will possibly go to a second ballot. You never know. On Sean Bailey, obviously I'm a Conservative. He had a good chance in the beginning, as was said, because he came from, it's a sort of a rags to riches, council estate. He worked with youths who are at risk of offending, which I think would play extremely well into London politics in the same way, Sadiq Khan's father, was he a bus driver?
Yes, he was a bus driver.
He never mentioned it. I think that would have played well, but like you said, with the gaffes he's made, and I just don't think that he has been an effective campaigner. People are following on Twitter. Again, obviously, it will mainly be Conservatives, but they're not going to vote for him. At the end of the day, if your own party won't vote for you, who are willing to vote for even joke candidates or lesser parties, then you've got a bit of an issue.
They could have had Rory Stewart.
Well, yes, there's always the argument about Rory Stewart. He was running his mayorship till he dropped out. Of course, there are some who argue that really the Tories should have made the offer to Rory Stewart to come back as a friendship gesture. Of course, that's to be said. Of course, there's always been my view that they could have ran, Lord Coe, the former head of the London Olympics, as this, London, man who knew what to do. But indeed, I think the point is mentioned here that London is a changing city. It's gone from arguably used to being the toss-up of Britain to a Labour city. It's now very much a Labour town. That is very much indicative of a Labour thing. And Sadiq Khan winning shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, it is Labour now. And since 2010, there has been an apparent shift, even in areas that are strongly Tory, of Labour gaining ground, even in areas, leave these suburbs. I mean, city of Westminster and London is a great example of this. Area that's historically always been Tory, but the majority is chipping away. And places like Kensington, Labour won that in a shocker in 2017. The area is now becoming more and more Labour. Max, thoughts on London mayorship?
Yeah, I think most of my views have been said, but I'd add to that just that Sadiq Khan he's become really a favorite person for the right and the Conservatives to attack hard over the last maybe 3 or 4 years. I mean, like even if you look back a couple of years ago, he was a target of Donald Trump for a while, and but in a way, I'm kind of enjoying as someone who's more left wing, just the fact that he's kind of pushed all that off and is kind of pushing through that, and he's not taken the attacks badly, and actually the voters have seen through the slanders, I guess you could say. But to be honest, I mean the as we've said that Khan is pretty much guaranteed to win, and it is the stuff further down the ballot which is the entertaining stuff. I'll be interested to see if Nico Milana can actually pull 5 or 6% of the vote. I mean the kind of people who would say in a poll that they vote for him, but probably less likely to vote. But I mean, even looking at him and Max Voss as well, the other YouTuber, they both said that this is partly about turning out younger voters and getting people involved with the political process. So I think they've actually got to be credited a bit there for what they're doing.
Indeed, there's been many candidates. Oh, Adam.
I just want to say one final thing, like just to expand upon Max's point about like the whole like not I wouldn't necessarily call them standards, but like the whole criticism about crime for Sadiq Khan. Like I guess this is kind of separate to the whole issue of like will he win or not. But I feel like a major reason why it doesn't seem to cut through much is because ultimately it has a really easy comeback. Because ultimately the mayor of London represents the same role as a police and crime commissioner, and you know it's not something you ever see a political figure criticised for. You know, when was the last time you heard of the Northamptonshire police and crime commissioner getting, you know, lambasted for crime rates in Northampton or whatever? It doesn't work because ultimately these budgets are set by the national government and a lot of things are determined by that. So that's just my own thoughts on it. But yeah. Yes,
and I think the story, I think with London, you know, as Labour probably will have a good night in London. The GLA may very well be a good night for them. Of course, we'll cover that a bit with the councils mixed in. But moving on in the mayorships, as alluded to, the West Midlands is the other mayorship in an area that is still very much a political barringer of where fates of political parties live and die. Andy Street, the Conservative mayor since 2017, who took over the post for the first time, the initial holder of that post, is currently running for re-election. His main opponent is Labour MP Liam Bryan, who has infamously been known in many circles of Britain for writing an infamous note left to the Conservatives when they entered power 11 years ago around this time, saying, "There is no money left," which of course... Good luck, indeed, which has never been forgotten by the Tories and very much has been used against Labour for the last 11 years. In this case, those two are running. Very competitive election. Most polling believes that Andy Street should win re-election. The question is whether it's a narrow or whether the Times, which had it earlier this week, him winning by a decent-sized margin. Of course, Street has won praise for being a very moderate, liberalish Tory mayor, running a very effective campaign, One Nation campaign, that's very much big on investment and being of a tolerance. Of course, his opponents argued that a lot of this is just promise with no actual results. So we'll first go off to, let's see, my screen. I'll first go off to Nick. Thoughts on the West Midland mayoral election?
Yeah, so a big thing about the West Midlands is that it contains the second biggest city in the country, Birmingham. And that might be a sign that, like looking at it from a very simplistic point of view, you might think that this is an area that Labour would do well in. And you might think it might be similar to London in a way that it's moved to the left in the last decade or so, but it's sort of not really. Like, especially the Birmingham suburbs, they sort of moved a lot to the right. They voted quite heavily to leave the EU. I don't think Birmingham itself did, but it voted I'm sort of just spitballing here. I'm not sure if what I'm saying
No,
is
actually, I
factually
believe
correct.
Birmingham did actually vote to leave the EU, if I recall correctly. I believe narrowly.
Birmingham voted to leave. Oh, well,
Yes.
okay,
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it did. Yeah.
Yes. By
okay,
narrow
that's even more extreme than I thought it was. Yeah, so yeah, it's definitely not the same as London.
Mhm.
It's but yeah, like yeah, as Pete said, this is Conservatives to lose. Labour will probably only win this if they have a really good night. Yeah, they have Liam Byrne, who is a former cabinet officer, I believe, and yeah, I don't I think you probably covered everything that there is to cover on Liam Byrne.
Just to quickly
But-
expand upon your point,
Yeah,
Nick,
you can spin. Go ahead.
it's really actually close how close Birmingham was with the EU referendum. It was 49.5% to remain to 50.5% to leave. So, compared to what's traditionally considered the red wall, way closer than anything else. But obviously that is very different when you get down to like which constituency are you talking about. But yeah, that was just what I wanted to add about that.
And it should be noted with the West Midlands office is that it takes in a very big range. It takes in wealthy suburbs, as Nick mentioned, that tend to be very historically Tory, but also take in areas that are predominantly Labour historically, like Wolverhampton and the Dudley area, which are more of the, some would call Red Wall, some would say the West Midlands isn't the West Wall. Of course, I probably lean with those who say it isn't, because the West Midlands has always been a different story. It's more of a, Beringer of the national mood.
Anything north of the M25 is the red wall, I think you'll find.
I think I agree with that. But I think someone at the Financial Times needs to get that lesson as well. Not naming the said journalist because I like him on Twitter, but you get
so
the idea.
my overall view for the West Midlands, I think it'll be a lot greater for Andy Street than most polls predicted when it was a lot closer. The poll you mentioned about the Times, I think, is more likely to be accurate, primarily because of the fact Andy Street is a fantastic politician. Not necessarily in the sense of like his record, which to be honest is already pretty good. But like, if you're looking at a man who like his main projects center around transport infrastructure, he comes across as a competent guy. When you see him, walking around or taking the train or whatever, like my dad, who can't even vote for him, he works on a rail station. Whenever he sees him like get on his train or at least interact with him, he always thinks, oh, that's a lovely guy, I'd vote for him, despite the fact he would traditionally vote for Labour. So it's just, not only is it that general appearance, he doesn't have that sort of necessarily Tory
Tory
yeah, exactly. He has like, oh, he's a competent person, and that's something we'd want to continue. Now, if you flip it on the other head to the Labour candidate, it's an entirely different story. Not only do you have obviously the note, which I dislike the most in British discourse because it was so obviously a joke. Like David Laws, when he was talking about it in his book Coalition, he was like, I regret showing this because it was a joke. But there we are. Anyway, I think that the wider point is besides that, he already has a whole mired history against himself, which show off incompetence. The fact his own internal campaign, in terms of sort of internal sources talking to journalists, they've said it's been an absolute mess in terms of actually getting people to even spell check leaflets, not only to deliver them, it's basic infrastructure stuff like that. So all of that is going against him. But to be honest, when I think about it, what was the alternative in terms of the actual choice within the West Midlands Labour pool? I don't know if anybody could have faced off against Andy Street in a very competent way. But to be honest, even if Liam could have, he's done it very poorly.
Sarah or Max?
Well, back onto the Brexit thing. We know that Birmingham is very ethnically diverse, particularly, Pakistani, that sort of neck of the woods, very concentrated in certain areas, like in Bradford as well. I can't remember which book it was, but it was a book about the campaign. And I think, who was it? Daniel Hannan, I think. He campaigned in Birmingham. And he said it was down to the Asian, sort of the shopkeepers, those kind of people who voted Leave, because they thought, how is it fair that, you know, people from Poland and Romania can come more freely than our folk can? And they are, I think, they will not necessarily vote Conservative, but they are definitely more socially conservative. There's sort of no doubt about that, especially if they're Muslim or very Christian, etc. And I think that's important to factor in. And the point about Andy Street's made, he's not really had any scandals. He's pretty moderate. He, like you said, he seems confident. I know nothing really too much about him, but when I see him, I think, oh, he seems like he's doing an okay job. So I think he'll win pretty safely. I don't think there's any worry about that, really. So, yeah, I think Andy Street is definitely safe. And, yeah, it's definitely Birmingham isn't as Labour as London is, not by probably a long shot. There are probably some seats that will always be Labour, but maybe we sort of always think ethnic minorities, particularly Pakistanis, and that are very much Labour, but some are Conservative and some are Lib Dem and others. So I think we have to definitely factor in ethnic minority voting, especially as the population of not only Birmingham but the whole country becomes more diverse.
Yes, indeed, and I think Max.
Yeah. Really, I don't know a lot about the West Midlands, but even looking at the 2017 election, there's even that inbuilt advantage that the Conservatives have coming into this, that UKIP drew 6% of the vote last time, so you'd imagine most of that's going to go to the Conservatives or just not turn out at all. And then on top of that, as you say, from what I've heard, Andy Street's he's a popular guy. He's moderate. He working on stuff on transport infrastructure is probably the best thing you could do as a mayor, because everyone benefits from that. Everyone likes it, and you don't really have to worry about the big national issues. So, as far as I'm concerned, he's a very strong favourite.
Indeed, and it looks very likely that Andy should win re-election. Of course, there has been a lot of push in Tory circles to say that Street may have a future besides his time at in the West Midlands mayorship, especially because of his popularity and the fact that he's a former executive at John Lewis, which is usually the type of things the Tories like in future candidates. So, you know, future parliamentary seats beware, such because of Boris Johnson. Moving on to the next mayoral election, that is possibly the most competitive mayoral election of the night. That is the West of England mayor, which in turn takes in Bath, Bristol, South Gloucestershire, and and Somerset, all of which is being open seat. The Conservative incumbent Tim Boyles is retiring, which has now led to a very competitive mayoral race where all the four major parties, the Tories, the Greens, and the Lib Dems, are all running very competitive candidates, two of which are former MPs in the Labour and Lib Dem case, and a local councillor in Samuel Williamson, and I believe in a councillor in Bristol of the Greens. So I'll let Adam go first on this race. Thoughts on the West of England mayorship?
So in a night that looks like it could be very, very bad for Labour, this could definitely be something that, you know, boosts their happiness by like 2% or something. You know, West of England looks to be something very good for Labour, primarily because of the fact that, you know, not only is the Conservative brand dying in, you know, completely dying off in places like Bristol, which I believe takes 60% of the vote in the West of England. A lot of that is concentrated Labour vote. So, you know, that's primarily a thing to be looking towards. Another thing that's in Labour's actual hand here is the fact that the Liberal Democrats are going to be, you know, performing a lot worse, or at least I imagine they'll be performing a lot worse than in the previous mayoral election. You know, that's primarily just because of the fact that nationally the Liberal Democrats aren't, you know, doing that well in the southwest as they once did. You know, even as close as 4 or 5 years ago. So that will play into Labour's hand quite, you know, steadily there as well. So yeah, I think this is definitely going to be one of the real centres for Labour. And to be honest, does it really matter that much? No, because the West of England mayor is basically just a glorified infrastructure salesman. But there we are.
Indeed, but I think if parties will love to take glorified salesmen if it means putting a W for narratives. Max.
Yeah, well, West of England again. It's a relatively interesting one because, as you say, Bristol's an interesting city in that it's pretty progressive. It's got a strong Green vote there, which I mean they got 12% of the vote in the last election. So I mean I'm not sure if that was to do with a strong candidate or not, but Bristol, as I say, Bristol's an interesting city. So it kind of throws a little bit of spanner in the works there. The other thing I'd mention is last time there was an independent who drew 15% of the vote. I think he was something to do with the NHS, and I would say it's probably quite hard to tell where his vote's going to go. Although, I'd still say the Conservatives probably got the advantage here, but yeah, beyond that, that's pretty much it.
Sarah?
I know pretty much absolutely nothing about this race, so I have nothing to add.
Nick?
No, I actually used to live in the West of England. I actually used to live in Bath, so I think this is an area that I do know quite well about. And this isn't really something that's really talked about in British politics a lot, but this is probably one of the areas that has the highest student populations in all of the country. It has 4 major universities in the area. Students don't really vote that with that in that high numbers. I think that's probably something that will affect the results in the general election. So if this was a general election, yeah, you might expect like Labour or Liberal Democrats to do better, or Green Party. That's actually one of the reasons why the Green Party does so well in this area. But yeah, I think everything's been covered. Yeah, this is an area that is quite left wing and yeah, definitely very competitive. It's definitely like a bellwether of how the night will go as a whole, and a sign for the times to come in the next few years, if we even have a general election in the next few years, or any other election that we might have. This race is probably the one that I'd look out for.
And if Lib Dems come second and actually win, the narrative will be changed. Second party status, here we come.
Exactly. And it should be noted, of course, in this mayorship, it is an interesting dynamic in terms of its regional dimension. We have Bath, which is a liberal democratic, become more of a stronghold these days because of the realignment there. We have Bristol, which has also become very much a Labour town as well. But we have the Conservatives, who still put up strong numbers in South Gloucestershire and Somerset. So it's an interesting balance of cities being, Liberal and Labour, but the Tories doing well in the suburbs and rural areas. You can say suburbs in Britain, but the rural-ish areas of the area. Of course, those areas still vote Tory very hard, and of course, some of these parts it used to be Liberal Democratic areas that have slowly moved away. And to the person who asked, I'm doing well. I hope everyone else who's on this call is feeling well. I hope I didn't drag them out this much at night. But moving on from the West of England mayorship, which were probably the most competitive one to watch for, we move to the Tees Valley mayorship. This one has been talked about a lot because of the dynamic realignment that the Tees Valley has been going through, and the fact that its mayor is extremely popular, who is projected to win outright with about 50 to 60% of the vote on the first ballot. This has been, good, I'm forgetting his name now. That's a yikes. Is Ben Hutchinson, I believe. Yes, but Ben Hutchin, my apologies, who is a very popular mayor there, who is very much, as mentioned with Andy Street, is very much an investment guy, very much a big transport and local infrastructure person, which is transferred very well with his popularity. It also should be noted, for those who are Hartlepool watchers, that Hartlepool is in this mayorship, and this mayorship result could have an influence over the actual by-election because of turnout discrepancies. If Tories do win Hartlepool in the mayorship, it could very well give a good sign of where their hope is on with the seat itself. I will pass this off and let whoever wants to speak first go first. Takers, going once, going twice.
To be honest, I don't know that much about it, mainly because the North can't stand it. Oh no, I'm from Bolton. It's fine. Anyway, so like the thing is that this is a very boring race because it's like it's in the sense that the Conservative candidate is going to win it. Polling shows it. The fact he's a very strong local figure shows it. So like that's the main thing that I can look at. It's the same thing with sort of West Yorkshire in the sense that I feel like it's going to be pretty steady on who's going to win it. And it obviously it represents some major realignment for that particular area. But to be honest, as a whole, like beyond the political career of this one mayor who may go the route of Boris Johnson of going from very successful MP and then cabinet, and then who knows from there. I think that's the only real thing that I can find quite interesting about it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll just come in and say, I think if you're looking at it from a Labour perspective, this is really, really a place where you're looking on it with sadness, to be honest, because you look at the names of the towns around there, the likes of Middlesbrough, Redcar, Darlington, stuff. These are quintessentially working class, manufacturing type, mining towns even, and of the past more. And these are places that 20 years ago Labour under the likes of Blair would be picking up. There would be the heart of the anti-Thatcher sentiment in the country, and now Labour are looking at those like they're slipping away fairly fast now. So I mean, as we say, the polling is has Conservatives wiping the floor with Labour, and again, there's no UKIP candidate who took 12% of the vote. So it's really all set up for a comfortable Conservative victory.
And it should be noted with some of these seats, especially with the Hartlepool tonight, that used to be the seat of one Peter Mandelson back when he was in politics. And the Tony Blair, mentioned him as well. His seat is also blue. Very odd to say that Sedgefield was blue. A lot of the Blair cabinet's seats are blue these days. Very odd. But yes, as mentioned, yes, Tees Valley, the port has been given free port status. The Tories very much see these areas as their base of where to win elections now and very much have candid to them. Some say that they've done their thing and some haven't. Of course, on a quick note, just because I mentioned this, I think other mayorships could be quickly noticed. Manchester has a mayorship election, however, that's probably Andy Burnham will win that again. The bigger question is whether Burnham decides to return to frontline politics in London after his second term is done. That remains to be seen because Boris Johnson route kind of opens the possibilities of these things. As Adam mentioned, the West Yorkshire election, which has one important thing, is that it may cause a by-election because the incumbent incumbent Labour MP, my bad, Labour, Tracy Babin, who holds the seat of Batley and Spen, this used to be Jo Cox's former seat before she was tragically murdered, will likely be elected the mayor of West Yorkshire, and because this has a strong mayorship, it will vacate. And the seat currently, I believe, has a 6% Labour majority, which is, if a seat like Hartlepool is going tonight, and especially that neck of the woods, could be interesting. Of course, this seat's a little better for Labour because of demographics, and it's not as shifting away as a seat like, say, Hartlepool.
Like the one quick thing that I'd say is different to Hartlepool is the fact that the 12% of the vote that is taken away from both Labour and Conservatives is with a localist independent. And that base is far more firmer than what the Brexit Party, now Reform Party, will ever have. But that's all I can think about that by-election, which I'm sure we'll have excellent commentary on in the future.
Well, of course, because commentary of northern by-elections are now a premium these days. Anyone else's quick thoughts about the mayorships of any other places that were not maybe mentioned, or anything you'd like to mention on the mayorship front?
If you ever, actually, I do have one final thing. If you ever call Batley and Spen the Red Wall, you two are an awful person. It was Conservative in 1992. It was Conservative under Thatcher. It's not Red Wall.
Very much the note to be taken. Seats that were held by Thatcher should probably not be called the Red Wall. Anyone else have any thoughts before we move on to councils?
There is more likely to be peace between Israel and Palestine than Liverpool going Tory. That is all I've got to say on that one. Liverpool is so red. It's as red as the football team. Yeah.
Terrible football club, but I'm a United fan, so I have to say that.
Oh no! My mum's a massive Liverpool supporter. We're going there for my dad's 60th this year, so
very bad.
I feel some loyalty. I went there for my 23rd. It's a great city.
And now we move on to everyone's favorite thing, the council elections. Everyone loves council elections because there are always fun stories of crazy people being elected are always fun. So I will let you all say what you want about councils because I think this is the individual side. So I'll go first with Adam.
Yay! Right. I don't know. I'll provide you with the Liberal Democrat perspective of this. I'm sure everyone can do a Labour or Conservative one, but I'll do the lovely Liberal Democrat one. So the real interesting perspective for the Liberal Democrats in this election is a lot of the seats that are up. That being, I think it's about 36% of the seats that are up are from 2016. So that was before the referendum in which these Liberal Democrat councillors were elected. So the demographics of a Liberal Democrat voter are very, very different to what it was pre-2016. The fact there weren't that many of them anyway. But, take, for example, Cornwall, the Cornwall Unitary Authority. That is currently no overall control with a coalition of Liberal Democrats and Independents. But ultimately, the demographics of what a Liberal Democrat in the Southwest is gone, essentially. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there will be, some very strong, better support because, Liberal Democrats have been dominating Cornwall for so long. But they're very much bleeding off their support to the Conservatives. So, if anything, I expect, that Cornwall Council is definitely one that could be seen as a gain by the Conservatives. But that's not where the really interesting thing is. The really interesting thing for me is, first of all, how does the Liberal Democrats hold up in sort of the home counties and areas in which we did very, very well in 2019, but not when these local election seats were up in the first time. So, for example, I'm talking Oxfordshire County Council, a lot of county councils in general, which had favourable parliamentary elections to the Liberal Democrats. I think those will be the really interesting ones to look at. And then, it really is a question of, does that offset enough of the support that's being bled from our traditional Southwest, which isn't really much of a thing anymore? But yeah. And then finally, with Labour's collapse in significant areas across the north of England, if that is something that retains, are the Liberal Democrats going to be people who are able to benefit off it? And I don't mean this in the sense of these red wall working class voters are suddenly Liberals in terms of their outset. It's more of the fact that the Liberal Democrat campaign style at a local election is fascinating. And I could go on about it because there are so many different elements that you could talk about. But the major thing is that, Liberal Democrats do very well at a local level because they're able to sell themselves as non-partisan and hyper-localist. So it'll be interesting to see if Labour's fall contributes to that. And just a quick thing for the comments that are put out in the chat, there won't be any exit polls out, not for any of the elections, sadly, and also polls closed 19 minutes ago. So,
and should be noted, if you're looking for results for our American viewers, there will not be any really tonight because of COVID restrictions have meant councils will have to take longer to count. So we may get a Hartlepool thing very early in the morning. So if you want to be awake as enjoying British politics at the early hours of the morning, there's that. But Adam spoke that. Anyone else want to speak on councils?
I will. No one else has anything to say.
Yeah, you can go next, Sarah, and then you, Nick.
Okay, so traditionally the party that is in power does not tend to do as well in locals. I think that's pretty much a phenomenon wherever you go in the world. I think the Conservatives will do well, but I also think it is so much harder to predict locals, purely because it is local. My council borough is dead Conservative. It's not a grimy part of Grimsby. It's mainly old people, so that's dead set. and I think our ward is quite nice, good services. So I think it will be down to, are your potholes being filled? Because everyone hates potholes. Is the litter everywhere? Bus routes, amenities, that is basically council. You can prize yourself away from national issues because it isn't about national issues. I mean, some people think councils are basically MPs, but we all know they're not. And it is basically down to do you think that your party of choice can do for your area? Can it be improved, or is it already in a good state? Conservatives were 2 years ago won my council for the very first time, which was when Theresa May visited, and I cursed it because she resigned 2 weeks later. But yeah, I think the Conservatives have a good chance, at least in the north, where the red wall has crumbled. Whether or not that is the same across the country, but I do find the Lib Dem point very fascinating because I know there are a couple of Lib Dems in Grimsby. Now, Grimsby was the highest Leave votes in the country at 72%. Yet there are some local Lib Dems who are, I know, very popular because people don't really care about, Brexit when it comes to the local elections, which I think gives them a much better shot than it would in, say, maybe in Wales, Scotland, and London. So I think it will, but like I said, I think it's very much harder for councils to be predicted because of the local nature.
Indeed, and it should be noted with the Liberal Democrats that depending on what happens, they may determine the two parties' fate in terms of whether they gain council seats or not. Nick.
Yeah, I wanted to turn to this poll that was conducted a couple of days ago, which polled red wall council seats, and it was heavily criticised because this is a very, very liberal definition of red wall. It contains areas which no one would ever think of, I mean, we were debating about whether Wolverhampton would be considered red wall, or and then it goes as far north as Durham, for instance, like that. I'm not sure what the conventional wisdom is there, but I don't know. So the poll says that a couple of them are expected to flip to, either flip or either Conservatives gain control or Labour losing control. Bury, Labour may lose it. Dudley is expected to flip to Conservatives from the overall control. Sheffield may be lost by Labour. Warrington and Wolverhampton same. And overall Conservatives generally expected to gain seats in that area. And I mean, I thought that was really interesting because that's by far the most in detail poll that I've seen of local elections in this cycle. We don't
also,
really get
Sunderland as well has been rumored to be a very bad night for Labour, allegedly from media reports there as well.
Sunderland. Yeah, it doesn't mention Sunderland. I don't know why. I'm not sure if that's considered blue wall by red wall by their. This is YouGov, by the way. I'm not sure how reputable they are, but those are the ones who have been following this. And I mean, another one I've had my eye on, mainly because I live here, is Southampton. It's one of the only Labour dominant areas in the southeast rather. It's the council at the moment is a Labour majority. Lib Dems actually hold no seats, which is quite unusual for the southeast, especially considering the year they had in 2019. Overall, I'd expect Labour to keep their majority here, but it'll be worth watching because this is probably one of the you're not really going to get many interesting elections in the southeast. So this is probably as fun as it gets down here.
Indeed, and there could be a very big regional divide tonight between the north and south in terms of who gains and who loses. Max, before I go to Max, I think there's a question about Parliament is unusual because of I think it's not unusual to have it scheduled on a day of a vote. It's just the thing is that because of the COVID thing, it was made more, I think, sense to put it all on one day for logistical purposes. But yes, there will soon be two other ones. really three, really. West Yorkshire, Murray, and the Sherlyn Gillam's former seat as well, which that one will probably get a big name tour because of how open vacancies and safe Tory seats tend to be. Max.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of harder for me as someone who lives in Northern Ireland as opposed to England to get a sense of local councils, because local councils, as we said, are such local based issues. But one thing I would say is I saw some interesting analysis. I don't know how accurate it is, but it was basically saying that if to follow as a rule of thumb, if national polling has the Conservatives 9 points or more up, then they will make a net gain in council seats. And if the gap is less than 9 points, then it'll be Labour making a net gain in seats. So it'll be interesting to see if that plays out. But maybe that's something as a way to follow. Other quick thing, we haven't mentioned the Green Party, who I think we would expect to make gains this time around. They made a lot of gains in the last round in 2019, really off the back of the big international school strike protests and stuff. But with those issues kind of raised to the fore, and maybe it's not like people's top priority, but for a council election, they'd be prepared to put a vote in the direction of the Greens, especially since environmental issues can cross over into local as much as national politics. With electric buses and increased cycle lanes and stuff like that. So yeah, I definitely expect them to gain, and that may come at the expense of Labour as well.
Yes, very much so. Always fun to have council results. Adam.
So luckily we do get some council results overnight. I honestly would not recommend staying up for any of them. It's not worth it. But the ones to really look for will be something like Sunderland, where Labour have a huge majority, which would take an insurmountable force to actually push it over. But it seems like it's possible. But I think the real thing to look at with local elections is a number of things. So the first one is, does Labour uphold, or are they able to hold themselves in the councils that they were able to make gains in 2019, 2018 in the south of England? Because ultimately, if the demographic realignment of the UK, UK politics is to actually be favourable to Labour, they need to make sure that they actually hold that sort of belt in the south and sort of Midlands-ish. But then another element of it is, are they able to retain those northern councils? And obviously, they're all over the place in terms of how they could go. But yeah, it's a sense of, if they lose both of them, they're in a really bad position. If they win both of them, they're fantastic. And if they're bleeding one from another, then obviously things are a bit more mixed there. So their strategy will have to change. But yeah, I think that my overall take would be, there is a very strong chance that the Conservatives do poorly, at least looking at national polling. If it's, obviously, besides like the outlier like YouGov, they're definitely something a lot closer. And if the Conservatives only have like a 2% gap above Labour, then Labour would be making hundreds of gains. So that's something major to look for. And also, I just think sometimes don't read too much into local election results. Like, obviously, if there's a broader trend, there's something going on there. But like it's in the same way of like, I don't know. I don't know how to put it specifically, but like, obviously, there are going to be specific places where things turn out to represent a national trend. But if something seems odd or different, I probably, wouldn't try to chalk it up to, being some kind of national issue kind of thing. A lot of the time, local election campaigns are dominated by local issues, as you'd expect. So yeah, that's just the overall thing I'd say towards it.
Something I've been shocked about is how much NIMBYism there is in local election campaigns.
Oh boy! Oh boy!
Yeah.
You're not kidding.
I've seen people complaining about like noise in the airports, complaining about apartments being built. I've got all sorts. I've seen all sorts in this area.
Yes, NIMBY councillors of all major parties is always a fun sight to see. Because got to sail to get to protect the environments. But hey, why not? Also, just because it was posted in the chat, and it is the thing that allegedly the postal vote in Hartlepool is going to went to the Conservatives. Of course, that waits to be seen, but that's reported by Sky. But if we've exhausted our time on councils, we will move to the last agenda item, which our friend Max here is probably well versed on. That is the DUP leadership election happening around the same time. It's due next week on the 16th. At the 14th, my apologies, 14th. If Max, you want to explain away on that, feel free to.
Of course, yeah, it's it's a really interesting time in Northern Irish politics at the moment, to be honest, because the DUP, they are the main unionist party in Northern Ireland, and they've been the driving political force here for a good 15 or 20 years. But they are in turmoil, to be honest, because I mean the whole Brexit process had them in tying themselves in knots, because they basically got into uh, almost a coalition with the Conservatives for a couple of years, and then they've basically taken the blame for this border down the Irish, or so-called border down the Irish Sea that we have, which is kind of restricting trade to some degree. Some outlets aren't exporting here at this time, so they're trying to bat that away, and now they're taking a really hard stance on that, trying to play to their base to get rid of it. And this really wasn't working. In the couple of we get very very few polls, but in the couple of polls we have had, they are dropping off. They at risk of becoming the third largest party as opposed to the largest. So basically, all the MLAs who are the members of the parliament in Belfast and the MPs, apparently about 85% of them, signed an open letter asking for the leader, Arlene Foster, to resign. She never saw the letter apparently, but this is kind of the way the DUP works in this kind of smoke and mirrors fashion. So in the last few days, we've basically had the emerging frontrunners. The MLAs have coalesced behind Edwin Poots, who is the Environment, Agriculture and Rural Affairs Minister, who is a creationist, which is not unusual in Northern Ireland, to be fair. Got to be like 20% of the population. Ultra conservative. The DUP base is really the ultra conservative, highly against any kind of abortion, opposing gay marriage, opposing ban on gay conversion therapy, which was a big thing recently because the DUP voted against that. And so he's along with taking a hard line on Brexit, he is really the ultra conservative man to lead the party. And the reason there a lot of people in the party want this to happen is because they are hemorrhaging votes to the right, to the TUV, who have been a minor player, but they hit 10% in the last poll, which would be disastrous for the DUP. And so his plan is to take them to the right. On the other hand, you have Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, who's an MP for Lagan Valley, I believe, and he presents a more moderate face, because he used to be a member of the Ulster Unionists, who are a less extreme unionist party, before he defected in 2004, I think. He comes across as a more kind of likable guy, less threatening, and he's not as extreme on social issues. He's equally extreme on Brexit. Everyone in the DUP believes they need to be strong on Brexit if they're going to retain their base. So basically, I mean, the latest news is that neither of them they've both been banned by the DUP from doing public interviews, and no one of the elected DUP are allowed to talk about it publicly, which is strange and arguably anti-democratic. But so that's really going to be radio silence for the next 10 days until the election actually takes place. They have also brought in 3 candidates for the deputy leader, who are Gregory Campbell, who is this kind of old-timer MP who doesn't really do anything apart from the odd. He got in trouble for some racist rhetoric last year. Paula Bradley, who's like the most moderate MLA in the whole party, and Paul Frew, who is kind of Edwin Poots light.
Mhm.
So I guess we'll find out in 10 days which direction the party goes in. I have to say, whatever direction they're going in with their leader, the direction they're going with electorally is downwards. They're definitely going to be losing seats in next year's assembly election. It's just a question of how many. They're losing seats to the right. They're losing seats to the left in the Alliance Party, who are on a roll. It's more a question, yeah, if they lose 5% of the vote, or 10-15% of their vote next year.
Yes, and it looks like, as I mentioned, that they've had troubles with the right and now Alliance on that front. Anyone want to jump in on this?
So, Max, I have a question for you, specifically about Alliance. So, where do you see their growth as a political party coming in the, say next year or so? Because obviously they're benefiting a lot recently, like in terms of polls showing their growth being absolutely enormous. So, where do you think it goes next for them?
They are likely to continue upwards a little. I would imagine they're probably in the next year. They can't. I doubt they end up with more than 20% of the vote. I think that's just laws of physics almost, that the votes can't move quick enough at this point. With them becoming a larger party now, there is a bit more increased scrutiny on them because they've always just been like the other non-sectarian party that people can vote for, but within them they are quite disparate in where there's some pretty libertarian types and there's also some pretty left-wing types. People want to know what their defined position is on a lot of stuff. They're trying to crush the Green Party. You have a couple of MLAs as well. So that they've been launching their big Green New Deal, which was kind of uncosted, but that they're really, really pushing at the moment, but it feels kind of like they're trying to do too much at once. If they can get their ship kind of together, they could conceivably become the largest party next year. Because like the moderate nationalists could start taking from the SDLP, which they already have done to some extent. But they could continue to take, if even they only need to take a couple of percent away from them. Also, Unionists are dead as a party; they'll not draw much, and the DUP, as I say, are also falling. That's the problem for the Unionists. They don't really have a credible Unionist voice right now because both the UUP can't define itself, and the DUP is in a spiral of a mess. So the Unionists are just going, well, we'll vote Alliance.
Anyone else want to say comments on Northern Ireland questions? You mentioned Poots. If I recall correctly, he was on the news saying the other day he didn't want to be first minister if he won this or something aligned to that.
Yeah.
So how would that work if he were to gain the leadership of the DUP but not want to take the first minister job that he would be entitled to?
It's a bit of a weird one. He's basically saying, okay, I'll be party leader and I'll kind of control the party, and then I'll have my man. It'll probably be a man. He apparently is going to be this guy Paul Given, who is kind of a non-entity, just similarly similar ideologies to Poots, who is just doing the day-to-day work in Stormont, the assembly. I think Donson would also have to do that because he's an MP and couldn't physically be a first minister. So it's as much as a logistics thing almost for Donaldson.
And it should be noted with Donaldson's seat, it's actually went down 14% on his majority from the last time, and it's the type of seat that the Alliance, ironically, may be looking at because it's a seat that's trending their way. Ironically, it seems to be a thing with DUP seats and more affluent areas of Northern Ireland that they're trending more to the Alliance and things.
Yeah. Lagan Valley, it's got quite a mix. It kind of takes in some quite affluent suburbs of Belfast, as well as Lisburn, which is a reasonably large town, reasonably middle class town. And the Greens have got a couple of councillors around there. The Alliance made big gains in 2019 council elections, and as you say, in the general election. It is probably not in reach in the next election, but certainly in the next 10 years, it's the kind of place that could certainly become competitive.
Yeah, a lot. Well, Alliance, to the question in the chat, don't really prefer not to be ambiguous on reunification. Of course, if they did come in second, I probably would put them under some pressure to finally start leaning in a direction that way, just because they probably would have the co-leadership job in that case, which would be very historic that a unionist party isn't in the slot there. But again, I think that depends. Of course, that assumes if the Sinn Féin is in first or second next year, which again, polling right now has them in first, but that could change in a year's time with DUP leadership and some other saga changing with one of the parties.
I'll just come in quickly on that. That's a really interesting thing. If the Alliance Party comes second, the Good Friday Agreement basically stipulates that it has to be a unionist and a nationalist in power. It basically didn't think about what would happen if a non-sectarian party got in. So, I mean, at the moment, it's kind of it's almost up to maybe the DUP's discretion as to whether they allow the alliance to take the deputy first or first minister position. So, I mean, it's almost there's gonna be legal challenges, I'd imagine, if the Alliance Party do come first or second, and it's not something a lot of people have thought about. So I'll be interested to see how that goes.
Could very much get the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland dragged into a decision there, which always is fun for London to have to rule on decisions of Belfast. But yeah, no, it's interesting to see what Northern Ireland is mentioned because of the shift that's happening with all the parties. It mentioned DUPs getting eaten from the left and right with the Alliance and TUV, which is the more harder, old school unionism, but still very much. Anyone have any last thoughts on Northern Ireland before we head for the closing of the show?
Oh, I'll just quickly say you mentioned the whether Alliance would be forced to take a position on nationalism. Well, really, the whole point of the party is whether is that they don't take sides. Their platform says it's like a vote of conscience. They'll say we don't mind which way you vote, but it's not. It's something we consider, but it's not our only thing. So I don't think they would take. They definitely wouldn't take a position because that's literally the platform they.
My apologies on that, and I was trying to frame it with a question in the chat. I think someone had asked about their thing. I just framed it badly on my end, but thank you for that. That's probably a good thing to know for our viewers now who maybe aren't versed in Northern Ireland politics, American or Brits from the other three countries of the UK. So we've reached the closing. I'll let you all have final thoughts on whatever you would like to put up for this before we wrap up. I'll let Adam go first. I don't know. Nick has his mic go first. I'll let Nick go first, actually.
I'm outraged that we haven't covered the most exciting elections of the night, which are the Police and Crime Commission elections.
Well, you can add some thoughts in.
I don't really have many thoughts. I watched a debate, like it was more like a forum actually of the candidates in my area, and that's Hampshire. This isn't. It's a very strongly Conservative area, but one thing that has been noticed is that the Conservative candidate just hasn't campaigned at all. So this is a potential pick up for Labour, but I haven't really seen any takes on this. So yeah,
fun. Next, wants to go next and offer their final thoughts. I'll go with then Adam, because it looks like you want to say something.
Yep. My final hot take. So, the real Twitter discourse is towards the Northern Independence Party. Of course, their lovely independent candidate, Thelma Walker. Right. Calling it now. And obviously, I will be embarrassed for my country if this is wrong or lower. Sorry, if it's higher. I think she'll get like 1.5%. That's my call. If it's any higher than that, and if it's anything close to what Paul said of like 6%, then oh boy, have I lost faith. But there we are.
So she'll, in your mind, she'll lose her deposit.
Oh well, yeah, exactly. And hopefully that that brand of politics will be nipped in the bud. Am I right? Thanks. I'll be here all week.
Sarah?
Just to echo what Nick said about Police and Crime Commissioner, I'm not going to lie, I thought my Police and Crime Commissioner was a Tory until I found out the other day when the leaflet dropped through the door, it's not, it's Labour. But it tells you everything you need to know about where my priorities are. They do traditionally have like the lowest turnout, and your candidate not campaigning is probably completely normal. But I want to end with thank you for hosting me, and thank you to everyone who's watched.
Indeed. Max?
Yeah, I'll just counter that on the Northern Independence Party a little. I reckon they'll go a little higher. I reckon they'll head up maybe towards 3 or 4%, to be honest. But that's really all I've got to add. Yeah, thanks for having me.
No problem. The comment in the chat, I am not a PPE student. I take econ and IR. I don't know if anyone else here is a PPE student or closing in on that gap, but not gonna lie. I mean, all those topics are always fun. I mean, PPE is a fun degree. Just they don't offer it at my uni. But thank you all, 4 of you, for joining tonight and taking time out of this. Wish you, for those who did campaign and canvass, best of luck for whatever political party you did. And I thank our viewers for being with us and listening to this informative segment. We will likely have a review show to be determined at a later date, where we will keep you an update on that. But I thank you all for watching. Thank you to our 4 contributors, the British contributors, for having their great takes on what is happening in the next 24 to 48 hours. We thank you for your contribute support to Elections Daily. Follow us on Twitter at Elections Daily. And if you want to catch this again, you can listen to this on any podcasting servicing you may carry. We are on every one you can find. And pass this to a friend. That we don't just cover American elections, we cover international elections. For the British here, we also cover American things, as we are an American-based place. So we try to multi-fascinate our coverage of the world. So thank you all for taking your time to watch us tonight. Thank you. Stay safe. And if you can, get vaccinated. Bye.